I remember the hour because the red lights in the Combat Information Center never changed. It was just past midnight, somewhere far out in the Central Pacific, when the ship began to feel different. The USS Harlan Bishop moved with a slow, careful glide, as if the sea under our bow had thickened. I sat at my console, listening to the soft hum of machines and the quiet breathing of the men around me. The smell of burned coffee hung in the warm air, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. A strange contact slid onto the sonar display. It was large, too large for any whale in those waters, and it came in close without making any normal sound. The shape split into 3 faint shadows that circled just outside our hull. A moment later, something knocked gently under the bow, like a hand tapping metal from deep below. No one spoke. No one moved. In that silence, I felt the ship being watched. And before that night ended, one of my men claimed he saw something rise beside us, something longer than the ship itself. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. The days before that night felt heavier than normal. Our destroyer had been moving through empty water with no other ship in sight. The Pacific stretched out in every direction, calm on the surface, but hiding a deep trench below us that ran farther down than any of us liked to think about. I had been on many long patrols in my years at sea, but this one carried a quiet strain that pressed behind the eyes. I kept telling myself it was only fatigue, yet the feeling stayed. I served as the weapons officer, so most of my hours passed inside the Combat Information Center. The place always felt warm from the machines, and the smell of diesel drifted through the vents with a hint of burned coffee from the small pot we kept near the charting table. Men whispered that the coffee tasted wrong whenever the sonar screens showed strange shapes, but no one wanted to say that out loud. Life on the USS Harlan Bishop followed a steady rhythm. The passageways were narrow and smelled of paint that never fully dried. The engine room throbbed through the deck plates. The crew worked in practice steps, checking lines, inspecting equipment, running drills until they blurred. Even with all that routine, something about this mission slowed us. Men walked a little quieter. Jokes faded quicker. Young sailors avoided the forward weather deck after sundown, saying the air felt colder up there. We had been told our patrol was a simple escort mission. A research ship moved ahead of us by the length of our destroyer and a half, towing a long acoustic array. Our job was to keep watch. That was the official line. Off the record, a few of us knew the research ship was studying unusual low-frequency patterns picked up near the trench. Briefings explained the sounds as large whales. The data, however, never matched that. I had seen whales on sonar many times. They came in slow arcs, steady and predictable. These shapes moved differently. They rose and sank in sharp curves, then vanished without leaving residual sound. The captain kept the destroyer under strict emission control. No bright lights. No open transmissions. Every electronic signal was watched. I understood why. When you work in quiet water, noise is danger. You learn to listen not only with your ears, but with your bones. You feel the ship, and when the ship feels watched, you feel that too. 3 days before the sighting, the sonar chief called me over to look at a faint mark sliding beneath us close to the trench wall. The return was too long to be any known creature in those waters. It stretched almost the length of our ship, then vanished. He tried to replay the trace, but the tape jittered and a sharp knock trembled through the hull. It felt like someone tapped a thick spoon against metal far below. The chief laughed it off, yet his eyes stayed fixed on the screen for the rest of that watch. During refit checks that evening, we recovered one of the drifting buoys from the research vessel. The technicians said it looked torn by rough weather. I saw something else. The metal frame had clean, curved marks along the edge, as if pressed by teeth the size of a man's forearm. I ran my hand over the grooves and felt a faint shiver move through me. The water around the buoy had been strangely still, even though a low swell rolled across the surface that night. Helicopter crews flying from our small flight deck came back with stories they tried to hide behind forced smiles. One crewman pulled me aside, speaking in a low voice. During a late flight, he saw a dead whale floating near the trench line. It had been bitten cleanly through the middle, the wound smooth and wide. The man's face looked pale as he told me, like he still saw the pieces drifting in his mind. He asked me to forget he mentioned it, so I did not write it down. That same night, a faint hiss filled the sonar room. The chief replayed a segment of low-frequency noise that pulsed in an uneven rhythm. The smell of burned coffee drifted through the vents again, thick enough to bring a dry taste to my mouth. Men shifted in their seats. No one said what we all felt, but every person in that room sensed that something large and curious moved in the dark water under us. 2 mornings later, Command sent an encoded message. The order was simple: hold position near the trench. Maintain silence. Continue observations. The captain looked tired after reading it. He stood at the plotting table for a long moment, staring at the chart as if the lines might explain something. I stood nearby, waiting for instructions. He finally told me to increase internal readiness and double-check all weapon systems. He did not tell the crew why. He did not need to. The crew already knew something strange followed us. By the time night returned, the sea had become unnaturally calm. The destroyer moved with slow rolling motions, as if trying not to disturb the water. I leaned on the rail during a short break and watched the glow of our wake fade behind us. Everything felt too quiet. The ocean stretched out like a flat sheet, holding its breath. The strange knocks along the hull returned just after sundown. They came in short taps, always near the bow, always spaced in an odd pattern that reminded me of someone testing the metal skin of our ship. I pressed my hand to the rail and felt each tap pass up through the frame. I thought they might come from shifting plates or thermal stress, yet the rhythm stayed steady. Too steady. By the time I returned to the Combat Information Center, the air inside felt warmer than usual. A sailor reheated an old pot of coffee, and the bitter smell spread across the room. The sonar displays glowed softly in the dim light, and faint marks drifted near the trench wall. None of them matched known signatures. We were one quiet ship above a place deeper than imagination, and every man on board sensed something rising up from that depth. The crew moved with slow, careful steps, as if afraid the water might hear us. I had seen fear in men before, but this fear was different. It did not come from what we saw. It came from what we had not yet seen, but felt brushing close to our hull. The knock under the bow changed that night. It gained weight, enough to make the deck plates shift under my boots. I knew then that something alive was down there, something the length of our ship or longer, and it had come closer, and it would not stay deep for long. The trench sat below us like a long wound in the ocean floor. Our charts marked it in calm lines, but every sonar sweep showed its depth, dropping far beyond anything our instruments liked to measure. When the sun set, the water above that trench grew darker than normal night. Even the horizon looked thinner, as if the sky stepped back from that place. I stood on the starboard side that evening and felt the air cool while the rest of the sea stayed warm. It reminded me of air drifting from a deep cave. The research vessel kept moving ahead of us by roughly the length of our destroyer and a half. Its light stayed dim. Messages came through short, encrypted bursts, usually telling us to recover damaged buoys or confirm sonar readings. Our crews worked in small teams to pull each buoy aboard. Many of them arrived bent or scored with long, smooth marks. No man wanted to say the word teeth, but every mind on deck thought it. One buoy came in missing an entire panel. The torn edge did not look ripped by waves. The shape was clean, curved, almost neat, with a single deep groove running across the frame. A technician touched the edge and pulled his hand back fast, as if the metal held a memory of whatever opened it. I watched him wrap the panel in canvas before taking it below. He did not look at me. He just whispered that we should send it straight to the captain. The captain took one long look at it and then ordered the crew to log it as damage from heavy seas. He said nothing more, but I could see tension in his jaw. That quiet pressure spread through the entire ship over the next day. Men kept their voices low. Each step on deck came with a sense of someone listening from below. During a mooring check, a heavy swell pushed a dead whale against our bow. The body came from the direction of the trench. The whale floated with its belly up, the skin gray and stretched. A line of torn flesh cut straight across its middle in a clean arc. The wound was wide enough for a person to walk through. Parts of the ribs hung open like broken pipes. I watched salt water gush out of the cavity as the swell lifted it against us again. Orders came fast. Do not log the body. Do not photograph it. Do not allow any recordings. The captain told us to use fire hoses to push it clear. The whale drifted away slowly, turning in the flat swell, and then sank after a few minutes. Its shadow slid down past the surface like a falling curtain. A helicopter crewman pulled me aside later that day. His voice shook. He said the shape he saw near that whale was not a standard shark. He said it surfaced briefly and moved with a steady glide, longer than our ship's beam. I asked him if he was certain. He nodded and then looked at the floor. He asked me not to write it down. I told him I would not. The next night grew strange in a quiet way. A heavy calm settled over the ship. The destroyer drifted in long, smooth rolls, almost as if held by a gentle hand. The air in the Combat Information Center warmed again, and the bitter smell of burned coffee mixed with a faint raw sea scent slipping through the vents. The sonar chief replayed another odd signal. The tone came in slow lines with sudden bends, like something huge changing direction faster than logic allowed. We began to hear more knocks along the bow. They came in patterns that did not match metal strain. The taps traveled along the underside of the hull from forward to midship, spaced in a strange rhythm. I stood still and counted the time between each knock without using numbers. I just felt the gaps in my chest, steady and sure. Something down there knew where we were. One evening, the captain received another coded message. This one took longer to decrypt. When he finished, he closed the small pad and looked around the room as if checking who might overhear. The message ordered us to stay on station alone while the research vessel moved farther ahead. It did not explain why. It did not reference the damaged buoys or the dead whale. It simply told us to hold position near the trench and record any unusual movement. The crew did not need an explanation. Everyone already felt the weight under the water. When we drifted that night, the sea stayed unnaturally still. Even the wind dropped. I took a turn on the forward weather deck and leaned on the rail. The ocean stretched smooth and wide, but the darkness below it felt alive, as if something waited behind a thin curtain. A young lookout approached me. He looked pale. He said he saw something rise close to the hull earlier, just a long shape breaking the surface for a second. He described a smooth back and a faint ridge. He felt it watched him. I could see fear in his eyes, not panic, but the kind that comes when a man senses he is near. Something far older and far larger than himself. I walked him back inside, but his words stayed in my mind long after he left. I returned to the Combat Information Center, and the smell of burned coffee hit me the moment I opened the door. The machines hummed with a steady pulse, and the air grew warm. The sonar displays showed faint lines drifting near the trench wall again. The shapes moved with a slow patience that felt deliberate. That night, I could not shake the sense that we were no longer escorting anything. We were being watched. The knocks under the bow grew stronger, each one traveling up through the metal frame and into my feet. The patterns were too even, too thoughtful. Something living touched our hull. I stood by my console and listened to the soft pulse of the room. Men worked in quiet concentration. No one spoke about fear, but I felt it in the silence. Each man sensed what moved under us, even if none of us had seen it yet. And out there in the dark water, something had begun to circle us, testing the length of our ship, waiting for the moment to rise again. The night after we finished our second round of checks, the trench below us felt closer. The water held a heavy stillness, as if waiting for something to rise. I walked through the passageway toward the Combat Information Center and felt each vibration of the engines roll through the steel under my boots. The smell of paint, metal, and a faint trace of burned coffee met me before I stepped inside. The air always felt warmer when trouble drew near, and that warmth clung to the back of my neck the moment I entered. Inside, the sonar chief leaned forward at his console. His shoulders were stiff. A few sailors stood behind him, watching the faint lines drift across the screen. I moved closer and saw a long shape sliding toward our bow at a steady angle. It stretched farther than any whale signature I had ever seen. It looked peaceful at first, but the chief pointed out something that cut through that calm feeling. The shape did not rise or fall like a living creature. It held the straight path, then turned in a clean curve that no natural swimmer could manage. Before I could say anything, the contact broke into 3 returns. They appeared side by side, each one moving with the same slow bend as the first. The chief tapped the screen, his finger trembling slightly. He did not need to explain. Those 3 shapes followed us in a pattern that felt intentional. The room fell quiet. Men held their breath without meaning to. We stayed silent under emission control, but the ship seemed louder to me than during any normal patrol. I felt the deep hum of the engines and the whisper of the ventilation system. Somewhere under the deck, a soft knock came from the bow, steady as a heartbeat. It was not strong enough to shake anything loose, yet I felt it through the soles of my boots. That same tap had echoed through the hull before, but now it came with a slow confidence, like a creature testing the reach of its own strength. I moved to the plotting table and watched our position drift closer to the trench. The captain joined me, and his eyes stayed fixed on the chart. He had been calm for most of the mission, but a frown cut across his face now. He whispered for me to put the ship at higher readiness. I nodded and stepped away to pass the order through the proper channels. Men hurried through the passageways with quiet footsteps. No one raised their voice. Fear has a way of softening noise. Minutes later, the forward lookout called through the internal line. His voice sounded thin. He reported a dark shape near the surface, about the length of our destroyer and a half off the port side. He said it rolled once, smooth and wide, then slipped beneath the water without making a splash. I asked him to repeat what he saw. He did, but his voice shook this time. Then the line went dead, not disconnected, just silent, as if he could not bring himself to speak again. I stepped outside to the wing of the bridge. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to tighten the skin around my eyes. The sea looked flat and empty. Our wake trailed behind us in a faint white line. Everything looked peaceful on the surface, yet I felt no peace. The ocean held too much depth below. It hid too much. A sound rose from the water then, soft but steady. Not a splash. Not a groan of steel. It was the same slow knock we felt through the hull, but now it seemed louder, like something brushed the metal skin of our bow with the back of a heavy body. I stepped toward the rail, but the captain called me inside. The air inside felt warmer again, filled with the smell of reheated coffee and worn electronics. The contrast made me uneasy. Back in the Combat Information Center, the sonar screens glowed with sharper lines. The 3 contacts circled just outside torpedo range. They did not approach directly. They moved in wide arcs that closed in with each pass. The chief showed me the depth estimate. Whatever followed us stayed near the surface now, not far under our keel. That alone troubled me. Large creatures stay deeper when they follow ships. They do not ride close unless driven by something. A sudden spike flashed on the screen, then another. The 3 shapes formed a rough triangle around us. None of them made the normal sounds of animals. No steady pulses, no rising or falling tones. Just faint movement patterns and short bursts of low noise that came from somewhere deep inside them. When the sonar chief amplified one spike, a shiver rolled across my arms. The sound was not loud. It felt like a short breath pressed against steel. The captain ordered general quarters, but quietly. Alarms stayed silent. Men moved quickly, fastening gear and securing stations. The destroyer shifted course by a small angle, enough to gain distance from the trench wall, yet the 3 shapes adjusted instantly, matching our turn with a slow grace that felt unnatural for anything of their size. As weapons officer, I prepared what we had. The 5-inch guns stood ready. Torpedo tubes were checked twice. Depth charges were moved to easy access. We did not want to fire first without clear threat, but the ship needed teeth ready. A few young sailors watched me with wide eyes. I told them to focus on procedure, nothing else. Procedures gave men something to hold on to when the unknown pressed close. Then the research vessel ahead of us called out over a quiet internal channel. Only one burst of sound came through. No words, no clear signal, just a sharp crackle like metal tearing underwater. The line cut off mid-burst. We stared at the speaker, waiting for a second call, but nothing returned. Within minutes, a patch of oil spread across the surface where the research vessel should have been. The dark stain stretched wider than the length of our ship. Floating debris drifted near the edges. No hull remained, no rafts, no lights. Just a broken scatter of wood, plastic, and something that looked like shredded cable. The captain asked for sonar confirmation. The chief swept the area. The screen showed no sign of a sinking hull. No large mass, no downward trail. Only the 3 shapes that now moved faster, closing in on us with slow but certain intention. I stared at the glowing traces and felt a deeper truth settle inside me. Something had taken the research ship without noise, without warning, and without leaving more than a stain on the water. And now the same presence that ended their mission had turned its full attention toward us. There would be no quiet hours ahead. Not anymore. The sea stayed dark that night, darker than anything I had known. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the ocean swallowed every bit of light. Our destroyer moved at a slow, steady pace, barely pushing water aside. The bow slid through the calm surface like a blade. I stood in the Combat Information Center again, watching the sonar display breathe with soft pulses. The faint smell of burned coffee drifted from the small pot near the corner. It mixed with the warm scent of machinery and the faint taste of diesel carried by the vents. The young sonar operator kept rubbing his palms on his pants. He stared at the screen with a fixed look. I stepped closer and leaned toward him. He pointed a finger at a steady mark hovering just outside our forward arc. The shape moved smooth and slow. It stretched almost the length of the ship and a half. Then a second mark joined it, then a third. Each one held equal distance from the next. like they moved with a shared mind. We had seen strange shadows before, but these held their place. They did not drift. They did not rise. They simply stayed in formation, just far enough to make us wonder why. The operator looked at me and whispered that the shapes were checking us. I did not answer. I only watched as the three marks followed us without making a single clear sound. Minutes passed. The quiet pushed against my ears until I felt pressure behind them. The ship rolled very gently, almost like it was trying not to disturb the water below. A soft knock rose up from the bow, hitting the frame with a dull weight. Then another tap came, heavier than the first. The deck under my boots trembled from the touch. Men shifted. Someone swallowed hard. Another sailor stepped back from the console, as if he expected something to climb up through the metal beneath him. Outside, the watch on the weather deck reported nothing new. The sea looked empty from there. No waves. No foam. No sign of the shadows following us. But I knew they were there. The sonar's light confirmed it. The pattern felt too clean to be random life. They kept to a triangle wide enough to surround us, but close enough to close in whenever they wished. I measured their distance with my eyes on the screen. They held at just under 3 ship lengths. No whale or known predator we tracked in those waters acted like that. The captain came into the room. He stood behind me with his hands on his hips and watched the shapes move. His jaw tightened. He asked if their behavior had changed. I told him no, they still stayed in that same formation. He nodded once and left without another word. His silence made the room feel smaller. A slow ripple shimmered across the sonar, followed by a faint distortion, like something massive passing through a layer of water that did not want to move. The whole line of the display quivered for a moment. I heard the sonar chief draw on a short breath. Then, one of the marks on the screen rose toward our stern, climbing with a speed I had never seen. It stopped just short of the surface and held there. The next moment, the stern watch shouted over the internal line. He saw a wide shape rolling beside the ship. He said it moved like a ridge rising from the deep, smooth, and long, with a faint line running across its side. He said it made the water curve around it. His voice shook, but he kept reporting. The shape slid under the surface again. The wake behind our destroyer broke into a pale swirl, as if the creature moved right below it. Back in the Combat Information Center, the air felt thick. The smell of burned coffee grew stronger, almost bitter enough to taste. I heard soft tapping from the bulkhead near the forward console. Each tap felt sharper than the one before. I placed my hand on the metal and felt a pulse of pressure move through it. Something large glided under the bow, close enough to push water into the steel. The captain ordered us to prepare shallow depth countermeasures. He did not explain why. He did not need to. Every person in that room already understood that we were no longer observing anything. We were being measured by something that moved with purpose. Torpedo crews stood ready. The 5-inch gun crew waited for word. I read the tension in their shoulders when I passed the messages to them. Then the research vessel ahead of us fell silent. It had been moving at a steady pace, just 1 ship length away from our bow. Its lights always glowed in a faint line on the horizon. Now those lights vanished. The radar mark showing its position blinked once, then faded. The captain ordered a check. We tried to raise the vessel on the closed circuit. Nothing answered. The sonar showed only 3 shadows circling us. No trace of the research ship. We changed course toward their last known point. The ship moved with cautious steps, cutting through the still water. As we approached, the sea looked disturbed. A wide patch, almost the length of our destroyer, rippled in slow motions. A thin layer of oil drifted on the surface. Small pieces of torn hull floated like scraps of paper on a dark floor. The research vessel was gone. No life raft. No distress flare. No sound of survivors. Only the broken remains of metal mixed with fading waves. Men whispered behind me. I kept my eyes on the water. Something about the scene felt wrong. A ship could break in many ways, but this debris looked too cleanly scattered, almost as if the vessel had been pulled down in one motion. The faint oil scent rose into the air. The sea settled again, calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. We stayed near the debris for several minutes. The sonar remained steady. 3 large shadows moved at even distance from us. They kept their triangle, circling with slow patience. They did not come closer. They did not leave. The captain gave the order to resume silent movement. The crew obeyed. We slipped away from the debris, carrying more questions than answers. I knew something waited below us. I felt it in the taps on the hull and in the steady calm of the depths around us. Whatever moved under that water had taken the research ship without leaving a trace of struggle. And we were the only vessel left in that stretch of sea, surrounded by 3 shadows that refused to break their circle. They were not finished with us, not yet. I did not sleep after the attack on the research ship. None of us did. The sea around the last known position still held a wide patch of disturbed water. It spread out for nearly the length of our ship, dark and slow, as if something heavy had moved through it only moments before we arrived. A thin line of oil clung to the surface. Small pieces of floating gear drifted inside the stain. No hull, no bodies, no life rafts. Nothing that could tell us how fast it happened. The captain ordered us to hold station while we searched. We circled at low speed, our engine noise kept soft. The men on deck leaned over the rails, scanning the water with tense shoulders. No one raised their voice, even the wind seemed to quiet down. I watched the sonar display from inside the Combat Information Center. It showed only faint static at first, then tiny gliding shapes far below the layer. They moved in slow arcs, as if returning from a hunt. While we searched, I thought about the coded messages we had been receiving. They always arrived at the same hours. They always carried the same short tone. They always told us to keep silence and continue gathering data. I had accepted these orders without question, but now the weight of them pressed harder. The research ship was not just lost. It had been taken. Whatever moved out here did it fast and without fear. After sunrise, I went to the secure locker to pull older sonar tapes for comparison. I wanted to understand the patterns we had been seeing. When I played the oldest reels, I found something the briefings never mentioned. Years of recordings showed the same 3-shadow pattern near other deep trenches. 3 shapes always kept the same spacing between them. 3 shapes always moved in slow, deliberate arcs. 3 shapes always circled the length of each ship they chased. Some of the dates matched the loss of submarines that had been blamed on accidents. I remembered one report from years earlier. A boat had gone silent near a trench not far from here. The official word was mechanical failure. Looking at those old tapes, I no longer believed that. As I replayed the recordings, a familiar smell drifted into the room. Burned coffee, sharp and bitter. I had grown used to it in the Combat Information Center, but now it felt stronger, as if tied to the noise itself. I leaned closer to the speaker. The low-frequency pulses came through with an uneven beat, almost like slow breaths. Each pulse ended with a faint click against the hull. My fingertips tingled when the sound reached its lowest point. I felt something then, a quiet sense that we were hearing not just movement but intention. I did not share this thought with anyone. Some things are hard to explain in clear words. Not long after, the captain sent for me. I met him in his cabin, where he stood beside the chart laid across his desk. His face looked older than it had 3 days earlier. He asked me to close the door. The moment I did, the knocks along the keel sounded again, soft at first, then spaced in a slow pattern that felt too careful to ignore. The captain spoke in a low voice. He told me he had known parts of the mission from the start. Not everything, but more than the crew. The program watching these waters had been active longer than any of us guessed. We were not the first destroyer sent to the trench. We were only the first one ordered to stay after contact. He believed the research ship was never meant to survive. It was put forward as a lure, a test, a way to draw the creatures into shallow enough water that their behavior could be recorded. Our destroyer had been kept close for the same reason. We were meant to watch, not rescue. When he finished speaking, the hull gave one heavy knock under the bow. It rang through the cabin floor and into my boots. The captain and I stood still. Neither of us needed to say what we felt. Something below us had returned, and it wanted us to know. We were no longer following a mission. We were inside an experiment. I walked out of the Combat Information Center after finishing my report and felt the ship shift gently under my feet. The sea had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than calm. I moved along the passageway toward the bridge, and the air carried that same faint mix of burned coffee and warm diesel. It followed me like a reminder that whatever swam under us had not drifted away. It was still there, waiting. When I stepped onto the bridge, the captain stood near the forward windows, hands behind his back, staring into the darkness. Only the red chart lights glowed behind him. The rest of the bridge looked like a shadowed room drifting through empty water. He did not turn when I approached, but he spoke in a low voice that sounded worn. He told me the command wanted us to hold our position until further notice. No release ship. No support from the research vessel because it had stopped responding. We already knew it was missing. Now, we heard it directly from him. He said the last signal from that vessel lasted only a short moment, a burst of broken sound like the radio had been grabbed and torn away. Nothing more came after that. I asked if search operations were planned. He shook his head. He told me to forget about rescue, because that was not our mission. He said command wanted live data on whatever circled us. The tone of his voice stayed steady, but his eyes showed how wrong it felt. We were meant to sit here. We were meant to let these things grow used to our presence. We were meant to record their behavior even if it put the ship in danger. When I walked back toward the Combat Information Center, that thought followed me like a weight pressing between my shoulders. I passed sailors in the narrow passageways. They looked tired and alert at the same time, moving with careful steps, not wanting to speak. They felt something too. Confidence drained out of a crew slowly when they sensed they had been placed in harm's way without being told why. On that ship, you could feel it in every quiet glance. Inside the Combat Information Center, the red lights kept everything dim. The sonar chief sat with his headset pressed tight, watching the screens as if staring at something that might rise through them. 3 soft arcs drifted around the edges of the display, spaced the same distance apart. The men did not need to ask what they were. They had seen enough strange movement to understand these were not whales. They acted in perfect spacing, moving in slow curves around a single point, and that point was our ship. A sailor whispered that the marks looked like a loose triangle. I stepped closer and saw he was right. The shapes kept the formation steady, always the same distance away from us, always circling at the same slow pace. I thought about the damaged buoys, the bitten whale, the knock on the hull that felt like a testing tab. Now these shapes moved like they knew our presence and understood it. The sonar chief replayed a recording taken an hour earlier. The low pulse came again, uneven at first, then leveling out into a slow rhythm. I recognized that pattern from older classified archives I had seen for only a short moment. It matched strange cases that never had explanations attached. Boats lost near trenches, submarines that went silent without distress calls, coordinates that should have never been linked but were. The same rhythm always appeared before the vessels disappeared. I leaned closer and lowered my voice. I told the chief not to share that audio outside the room. His hand shook, but he nodded. The smell of burned coffee lingered over us, warm and bitter, as if the room itself remembered every moment these shapes had drawn near. The next order from command came without warning. Hold position. Maintain full silence. Do not escalate. That was all. It reached us through a secure system. The captain read it twice before shutting the terminal. He did not hide the frustration on his face. He looked like a man forced to place his crew in the path of something he did not understand. Hours passed, and the 3 shapes kept their slow circle. Sometimes they sank deep, taking their shadows off sonar. Then they rose again and brought that heavy pressure under our hull. The knocks returned too, faint and spaced in that same strange rhythm. I pressed my hand to the bulkhead and felt each knock travel up through the metal like a message no one could translate. Late that night, I spoke quietly with one of the senior petty officers near the damage control station. He told me he felt the ship tilt a little when one of the shapes passed beneath us earlier. Not a strong tilt, just enough to feel in the knees. He looked troubled as he said it. He had sailed many years and trusted his own senses. I trusted them too. By dawn, the destroyer felt like a floating island surrounded by something patient. The sea stretched flat and empty, yet every man on board knew we were not alone. The 3 shapes never touched us again during those hours. They circled, waited, and watched. I looked out over the water and understood the truth with a clarity that felt cold. These creatures were not simply drifting. They were studying us the same way we had been told to study them. Each slow circle, each measured pass along our hull, each near silent rise close to the surface, all of it showed intention. Whatever came next would not be by accident. The night of the attack felt wrong from the first minute. The ocean lay flat under a moonless sky, dark enough that the horizon vanished. Our destroyer moved at a slow drift near the trench rim, barely pushing water. The bow rose and fell in long, gentle breaths, yet every man on watch sensed weight gathering below us. I stood in the Combat Information Center, watching faint lines on the sonar screens fade in and out. The air felt warm, heavy with the smell of old coffee and diesel that clung to the vents. My hands rested on the console, steady but tight. A soft knock rolled through the hull. Then another, each one heavier than the last. They came in a moving pattern under the bow, like something sliding its head along the metal skin. The sonar chief adjusted gain levels, but the screen stayed quiet. That silence unsettled me more than any noise could have. If something that large could move without sound, then it was choosing silence. When the first hard impact came, it struck like a sudden punch from deep water. The bow lifted a small rise, just enough for the stern to groan. Loose gear rattled. A few men stumbled. The chief cursed under his breath, wiped sweat from his face, and stared at the display. A long shadow rose from below, far too close for comfort. It stretched almost the entire length of our ship, then peeled off to the right. Two more shapes followed behind it, sliding into a loose formation around us. The captain stepped into the combat information center just as a second slam hit us. This one felt deeper, more centered. It ran up through the steel like a long shiver. The destroyer leaned a little, and I heard the wood inside the consoles shift. The captain looked calm on the outside, but his jaw tightened as he told me to bring all weapons to ready status. His voice stayed even, but I could hear the worry behind his words. We tried to send a coded signal to the research vessel, but their reply was only static. A moment later, the radar operator reported that the research ship's icon had vanished from the display. No trace, only open water ahead of us. The captain stared at the empty screen for a long second, then told me to keep all channels silent. Whatever took that ship did it without leaving a sound. Another knock tapped under the keel, stronger and closer. I stepped to the plotting table and studied the positions of the three contacts. They moved in a slow circle around us, always keeping the same rough distance. 3 ship lengths on the left side, 2 on the right, a little more astern. They were not drifting. They were placing themselves. Outside, the sea stayed strangely smooth, no white caps, no sudden waves, just a dark plane holding something enormous. The next strike came without warning. A crushing blow from directly below threw the bow upward as if lifted by a rising platform. Men fell into rails and consoles. Lights flickered. My knees hit the deck, and I grabbed the edge of the plotting table to keep upright. A loud metallic groan rolled through the destroyer, long and low, like the ship was crying out against the force pressing her up. The forward sonar dome was either crushed or torn free. The sonar chief tried to regain control of the display, but half the screen turned into static. The remaining half showed 2 of the shapes rising toward the surface on our left side. The captain gave the order. Lights on the mast flicked to high, casting a pale glow across the water. I moved to one of the narrow side screens and tried to see through the darkness. Men on the bridge shouted that something surfaced starboard. Then the 5-inch gun fired its first round. The recoil thudded down through the deck. The shell burst in the dark, lighting the sea in a brief flash. In that moment of light, I saw it. A massive jaw, easily the length of our ship's bow section. Teeth longer than a grown man's arm rose from the water, smooth and gleaming. The head that held those teeth seemed carved from dark stone, but it moved with a slow, confident ease. Water cascaded from its back, shaping a wide, dark hump that curved longer than I believed a living creature could grow. One eye reflected the ship's light with a dull yellow glow. Not afraid, not surprised, only watchful. The beam swung away just as the creature sank beneath the surface, leaving a swirl the size of a small house. The deck shook again as another shape brushed our starboard side. The hull vibrated with the contact, metal flexing in a long, painful arc. The captain told me to prepare close-range weapons. I relayed the order, hearing my own voice sound steadier than I felt. Men moved with tight, focused steps. No shouting, no panic, only trained motion. They knew they might not survive this, but they acted anyway. A sudden roll sent a toolbox sliding across the deck near my feet. Someone yelled that the rudder was jammed. Another shout followed that water was coming into one of the forward compartments. The destroyer was taking hits faster than the crew could report them. A fresh impact shook the ship sideways. The starboard side dipped lower than it should have. I grabbed a rail to keep my balance. Men near me steadied themselves against consoles. Sparks burst from a panel near the communication station, showering the floor with tiny glowing flecks. The room smelled like burned wires and coffee that had sat too long on the warmer. Then the loudspeaker crackled. The captain called for continuous fire on any surface break. The 5-inch gun thundered again. The mount shook, the deck trembled. Another splash erupted far off our bow, followed by a deep water rise as something huge rolled just beneath the surface. For a brief moment, the sea calmed again. No movement, no knocks, no shadows on sonar, only the heavy sound of the ship breathing through damaged bulkheads. I knew that silence. It was the kind predators used before turning back for the next strike. Water poured across the main deck in long sheets that pushed men off their feet. The destroyer leaned hard to port as the second creature struck the hull again. I grabbed the rail and held on while the deck shuddered under me. Every hit carried a deep weight, as if the sea itself had grown hands and was trying to pull us under. The night stayed dark except for the thin beam of the forward searchlight slicing across the waves. It caught nothing but white spray and moving shadows. The engine room reported rising floodwater in the forward spaces. Pumps struggled to keep up. The crew fought to keep the ship balanced, shifting weight, closing hatches, patching what they could. The captain ordered us to keep firing even as systems failed one after another. He stood near the bridge window, feet apart, steady despite the rolling deck. He watched the dark water, the same way a man watches a door that is being pushed from the other side. A loud knock ran the length of the keel, stronger than any before. I felt it travel up my legs and settle in my ribs. It reminded me of the strange taps we heard earlier in the patrol, only now they felt like warnings we had ignored. I moved to the weapons console and checked what we had left. We still had the 5-inch gun, but the barrel smoked from the last series of shots. Torpedo stocks were low. The small arms locker would do nothing if the creatures broke the hull open. Another return appeared on radar, rising fast from below. A long dart-shaped surface beside us, close enough that the ship rolled toward it. The wave it pushed up washed over the forward gun mount. In the brief flash of light from the deck, I saw a skin that looked like rough stone, marked by deep scars. The eye was the size of a round window, dark and calm, following the movement of our ship as if reading us. It dipped under again before the gun crew could bring the barrel around. The third creature moved toward the stern. Something hit the rudder so hard that the metal groaned through the deck plates. Steering control dropped, leaving the ship swinging in a slow, helpless arc. The captain called for emergency propulsion changes, trying to keep our broadside from facing the next strike. The destroyer responded with a tired shudder. Steel can take only so much before it starts to remember every old blow. The air inside the Combat Information Center grew hot and close. The burned coffee smell thickened again, mixing with a sharper scent that reminded me of wet metal left too long in the sun. I brushed it off, focusing on the sonar screen as another shadow rose beneath us. The return stretched nearly the full length of our ship. It held steady for a moment, then split into two moving shapes. I felt my hands tighten on the console. Men on the aft deck shouted as a huge swell lifted the stern. The creature surfaced again, jaws open, showing rows of long teeth that curved inward like hooked steel. Spray crashed over the railing, knocking two sailors off their feet. One slid toward the edge before another man grabbed his jacket and hauled him back. The wave took equipment, loose gear, and a broken section of rail with it. I watched the water swallow everything without slowing. The captain ordered a full spread of our remaining torpedoes. The weapons shot out in bright white trails. Two found nothing but empty water. The third struck something solid. A low, heavy thump traveled through the sea, strong enough to make the ship vibrate. A wide patch of water turned white with rising foam. For a moment, the sea stilled, as if stunned. Then movement resumed. The wide shadow closest to our stern pulled back, leaving a trail of dark water. The other two shapes moved faster, not slower. They rose and sank in tight arcs around us, closing the distance little by little. They felt angrier now, as if the blast had awakened something deeper in them. The hull knocks returned, sharper and closer together. They ran under the deck like a warning tapping through pipes. A sudden impact struck the starboard side, rolling the ship far enough that the deck tilted hard beneath my boots. Loose equipment slid across the floor. A man fell against the console. I grabbed a railing and pulled myself upright as the destroyer fought to level out again. The sea outside rumbled with churning water and deep shadows. The 5-inch gun fired its last workable rounds. Each shot lit the deck in a wide flash and showed the dark shapes turning, circling, judging distance. One shot landed close enough that the sea burst upward in a tall column. The creature near the bow sank fast, leaving only a ring of disturbed water. I hoped we had heard it. The sonar return faded, then came back weaker, but still moving. The stern creature surfaced again, closer than before. Its snout broke the water first, then the long curve of its head, followed by a row of jagged fins that ran down its back. I stared at it through the bridge window, unable to look away. It swam along our hull, almost brushing the side, moving with slow control that felt deliberate. Our ship, damaged and struggling, could not match that grace. The creature dipped under the keel. The sonar screen lit with a bright mark. Pressure alarms rang from below as the hull felt the weight of something passing under it. I braced myself for another strike, but none came. Instead, the return moved away from us. The other two followed, forming the same wide formation we'd seen on earlier nights. They sank deeper, slipping toward the trench with steady, unhurried movement. The sea slowly calmed. The air lost the sharp smell. The knocks faded. The ship hung in damaged silence, rocking gently as if exhausted. Men stared out across the water, unsure whether the danger had passed or only paused. I watched the last faint sonar trace slide down the screen and vanish into deeper water. They had chosen to leave us alive. I did not know why. It felt less like mercy and more like a choice made for reasons we could not understand. And as the destroyer settled into the long hours before dawn, I knew the night was not over. The sea still held more questions than answers. Gray light crept across the water as the night thinned, but it brought no comfort. The destroyer moved with a wounded sway, each slow roll reminding us how close we had come to breaking apart. The sea looked calm now, almost soft, as if it had hidden every sign of the chaos that tore through it only hours earlier. I stood near the bridge window and watched the horizon. My hands rested on the frame to steady myself. Every part of the ship felt tired, from the deck plates to the men who walked on them. Damage reports came in one after another. 4 compartments were flooded from where the bow struck that first rise of water. The sonar dome was gone, torn clean off. The rudder hung stiff, barely responsive. The hull along the starboard side held long dents that ran nearly a third of its length. Some dents curved inward in a way I had never seen from collisions. They followed an arc that matched the shape of a jaw more than the shape of a rock. I kept that thought to myself. The crew moved with quiet purpose. No one talked much. Men carried hoses, patch kits, cutters, and stretchers. They cleared debris from the deck and pulled twisted metal to one side. The smell of diesel rose through the hatches, mixing with the same faint burned coffee scent that had become too familiar during our patrol. It drifted from the Combat Information Center, where some of the machines still overheated. I tried to ignore the smell, but it stayed with me, sharp enough to remind me of the knocks that once tapped along the hull. We gathered the injured in the mess area, turning it into a wide, makeshift aid station. I helped where I could, steadying men as corpsmen wrapped wounds or cleaned cuts. A sailor from the aft crew sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, shaking from cold or fear or both. He kept staring at his hands, as if trying to understand how he survived when others had not. I wanted to tell him something comforting, but the words would not come. I had nothing honest to offer. We lost men during the night, some washed overboard. Some struck by debris, others killed in the lower compartments when the first impact tore through the bow. The captain ordered their names recorded in a small notebook. He kept that notebook in his pocket, running his thumb over the cover from time to time. I never saw him open it. I do not think he wanted to read the list yet. By midday, the sea shimmered with a soft shine, almost peaceful. That calm felt wrong. The trench lay behind us now, deep and silent. Our engines pushed the ship forward at a slow pace, using whatever power the damaged systems could offer. Each vibration felt uneven, like a heart working too hard. The air carried a faint sharpness, the same raw sea scent that drifted in whenever the creatures rose close beneath us. Even with them gone, the smell lingered. The captain called the senior officers to the bridge. His voice stayed steady, but there was a weight behind it that had not been there before. He told us we would maintain heading until we reached open waters where help could meet us without raising questions. No one asked what kind of questions he meant. We already knew. Nothing about this mission would ever appear in open reports. The men who survived would be given a different story to tell, and the truth would sink with the bits of broken metal still drifting behind us. A faint tapping traveled through the deck near my boots. It was light, soft, and quick. I knelt and pressed my hand against the metal. The deck vibrated faintly, but the pattern was not the same steady rhythm we heard when the creatures circled us. This was only the engine struggling, uneven in its beat. Still, I held my breath for a moment just to be sure. Memories of the knocks returned too easily. Late in the afternoon, shapes appeared on the horizon. At first they looked like small specks. As they grew, we saw the outline of a large supply ship and another destroyer. No signals flashed between us. No calls were made. They approached slowly, as if carrying orders written long before they set out, orders that did not require explanations. The supply ship stopped a short distance away. From its deck, A smaller group of boats launched and headed toward us. The men on those boats wore dark uniforms with no markings. They climbed up our ladders without greeting anyone. They moved past the wounded and stepped into the Combat Information Center as if they already knew the way. We were told to gather on the forward deck. The captain stood with us. The men in dark uniforms separated us into small groups and questioned each man quietly, writing in small notebooks. They asked for times, positions, and events, but never once mentioned the creatures. They did not need to. Their questions moved around the truth without touching it. They were shaping a version of the night that could be believed by people who had never stood inside a ship that shook under the weight of something older than our charts. I watched them take our tapes, our logs, our notes, and even the personal recorder one of the sonar men kept in his bunk. Everything went into sealed cases. They carried the cases off the ship without looking back. By the time they finished, the sun had dropped low. The sea turned a darker shade, quiet and cold. The men in dark uniforms left as silently as they arrived. The supply ship drifted away. The other destroyer took position beside us, keeping steady watch without saying a word. Night returned slowly, settling over us like a heavy blanket. The crew felt the change in the air. We had survived the worst night of our lives, but we all understood something clear and simple. Survival did not mean freedom. Not from the creatures, not from the truth, not from the silence that followed us now. The ship creaked softly as it cut through the dark water, and I knew the deeper questions waited ahead. We were alive, but we were not finished. The days that followed moved in a slow, heavy blur. We stayed anchored under escort, waiting for repairs and waiting for someone to tell us what the official story would be. No one mentioned the three shapes again, not even in whispers. The crew acted like men who had walked away from a burning building and did not want to turn back for another look. Every one of us carried some piece of that night behind the eyes, but silence felt safer than trying to explain it. A small team from Shore Command boarded us after sunrise on the third day. They wore plain uniforms with no names. They collected every log, every tape, every scrap of written notes. They asked their questions in calm voices, never raising them, never reacting to what we said. When they finished, they told us we would all receive updated reports of the event. Those reports listed a collision, a minor fire, and sudden mechanical failure. Nothing else. The bodies of the lost crew were transferred quietly to a supply ship. The ceremony was short. The chaplain spoke with steady words, doing his best to give meaning to something no one could speak of honestly. I stood near the rail and watched the folded flags placed in careful hands. A soft knock traveled through the hull then, too faint for most to notice. It passed like a small memory brushing the ship one last time. When we finally sailed home, the sea stayed calm. I could not tell if that brought comfort or unease. I walked the weather deck often, staring out across the water. I could not stop myself from comparing the horizon to the length of our ship, as if judging distance the way those shadows had judged us. The smell of burned coffee drifted from the galley one evening, and for a brief moment I felt that same dry taste rise in my throat. The past does not let go quickly. Back on land, we each signed the final papers. Our stories were collected, edited, sealed. I handed in my report and walked out of the building feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. A man can leave a place, but he cannot leave what the deep water chooses to show him. I still think about that night when the house grows quiet. Sometimes I hear a faint tap under the floorboards, soft and irregular, almost like a knock traveling up through metal. I tell myself it is nothing. Old pipes, settling wood. But the sound makes me stand still for a moment longer than needed. What we faced out there did not rise for us by accident. It came from a depth older than our maps, older than our names for anything in the sea. It watched us, tested us, and then let us go. That choice stays with me more than the fear. Some nights, when I lie awake, I picture those three long shadows sliding down into darker water, circling something far below, moving with the same calm confidence they showed beside our ship. And I know they are still out there deep in the trench, waiting for the next time the quiet sea calls them to rise. I am older now, far from that deck, yet the memory has stayed as clear as the night itself. I speak in a quiet voice because the truth does not need force. It only needs time. For many years, I tried to convince myself that the sea had played tricks on us. I tried to hold on to simple answers. But the knocks under the keel, the wide shadows, the torn buoys, the missing ship, the long silent shapes that moved with purpose around us, all of it stayed inside me. Some nights I sit alone in my home, and the house feels still in a way that reminds me of that calm water before the first strike. I stand very still and listen. Sometimes I think I hear a soft tap along the floor, light and steady, like someone testing the wood. I tell myself it is only the pipe settling. Still, the sound always feels familiar. I catch the smell of burned coffee at odd hours. I know it is only my own kitchen, yet for a brief moment I taste warm diesel and metal on my tongue, the same mix that filled the Combat Information Center on the night the creatures rose beside us. I see the faint glow of old screens in my mind. I hear the quiet breath of men waiting to learn if they would survive. When I drive past long freight trains, I sometimes measure their length without meaning to. I compare the distance to our ship and then to the shapes that circled us. The habit never left me. It reminds me that the world beneath the waves holds more than we choose to admit. I tell this not to frighten anyone. I tell it because silence carries its own weight, and I have carried this one long enough. The truth is simple. We were not alone that night. Something old moved in that deep trench. 3 shapes that watched us with calm intention. They chose to let us live, though I never understood their reason. I believe they are still down there, swimming through dark water far below where sunlight fades. And somewhere in that quiet depth, 3 shadows as long as my old ship move in slow circles, waiting for the next sound that calls their attention. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And for more amazing horror stories, just click the ones showing right now on your screen.